And here we go. All right, super exciting. Hello and welcome everyone. This is the first episode of Turnaround Tuesdays, our new business podcast. No fluff, just real talk, tips, and turnarounds. I'm Alexandra Capellas Peters, founder and CEO of Cansulta, and I'm really excited to be kicking this new series off with all of you today. For those of you who don't know us yet, Consulta is a global consulting hub. We connect organizations of all shapes, sizes, and industries to our trusted, vetted consultants and experts in strategy, finance, operations, HR, marketing, technology, and more I can't even remember. Unlike traditional firms, we make our top tier expertise accessible. We're faster, we're more affordable, and we're flexible for your needs. Why Turnaround Tuesdays? Well, we created this series because we saw a real gap. So, very often, the business podcasts and webinars that we've been seeing have been a little bit too fluffy or sometimes a bit too academic. So, our goal here for you is different. We want to share real world strategies and stories that you can take back to your organization and you can put to use right away. So every other week, we are going to feature one or maybe more of some of our consultants, our partners, our experts, and we're going to dig into the practical ways that you can strengthen your business, reset your direction, and unlock growth. Before we dive in, I just want to mention a few things that you're going to leave with here today. The first one is a free gift. We have a practical guide to help you apply all of today's lessons to your own business. I also have a call to action. So I want to invite you to book a free intro meeting with today's guest expert, Chris, so that you can explore your own challenges with him one on one. And an exclusive offer that's pretty new. As a thank you for coming and being a guest with our very first episode, you're going to get early access and a special discount on our just launched business health audit, which is a structured way to assess your strengths and blind spots in your organization, something we're pretty proud and excited about that's brand new. So we'll share all those details again at the end so you don't have to worry about them and you won't miss out. And finally, let's dive in. I'm really excited and ready to introduce our very first Turnaround Tuesdays guest, Chris Rotolo. Chris is a growth and innovation consultant. He's the co-founder of Grow Well, which is a strategy and facilitation firm that helps organizations reset, refocus, and grow. He has decades of experience in senior roles at multinational and full service agencies, where he's supported organizations like Sick Kids, the Canadian Red Cross, and the United Church of Canada in building long-term meaningful relationships with their stakeholders. He brings with him a special passion for mission-driven and value-based organizations. So those would include nonprofits, educational institutions, sustainable companies, and he helps them not only scale, but do so with purpose. Chris also works with sector development organizations to educate nonprofit leaders. He teaches growth and strategy and at Ontario colleges and universities, which is how I was first introduced to him many years ago. And on top of all of that, he gives back by creating and delivering workshops to underserved communities. So he's a pretty awesome guy. What I love about Chris's approach is that he combines both a strategic vision with very hands-on tactics. So he doesn't just advise from 30,000 feet. He helps leaders energize their teams, rethink their strategies, and capture those early wins that really build momentum. So today, Chris is here to share with us his first 30 days playbook for taking an organization from stuck to scale, resetting your direction, helping motivate your teams, and sparking all that change in just a month. Pretty big, pretty big mandate. Chris, thank you so much for being here. And finally, let's dive right in.
Thanks for having me, Alexandra. Thank you to you and Consulta for hosting. Um, Nowhere to go from but up from here, I hope. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been very lucky. These days, they're rediscovering the value of the generalist.
Mm,
which is what I'd say my role has always been. I don't, people have abused the term strategist for too long. So whether you call it like cross-functional or portfolio professional or
mm,
multidisciplinary, I've been fortunate to work to a degree of depth across a lot of areas related to what I do now. I get to work with leaders who are passionate about impact. But they often, like when they're getting introduced to me or when we're having a conversation, it's usually because they've hit a wall with strategy.
yeah. Yeah. We hear that a lot, right? Where people say that they just feel stuck. And that's right when we were talking about this first episode. Um, we hear that a lot when we speak to leaders that people kind of just say something feels off, right? Like, I know something's wrong. We should be growing. We're working so hard. Everybody says, oh, we're so busy. But it just feels like it's not necessarily having that impact, that we're not going anywhere. What do you think, Chris, from what you see, what are kind of the early signs that something's a bit off and that like the company and the organization's lost its momentum?
Uh, I think it's actually really hard or really easy for people to detect, but really hard to put into words.
Mm,
Um, I'd say stalled decision making.
yeah,
Right? Too much bureaucracy in doing that, reasons not to change, not to act, not to implement. You can sometimes see the opposite. Way too many priorities and staff burnout, a loss of motivation or enthusiasm, or like, and that's like people, the people side, the process side. You can see a lot of new initiatives growing in scope, right? Budgets growing, but like a cancer, without clear results, without being tied to specific objectives. So what are they, this amorphous
yeah.
growth, what are they growing towards? So it's usually like that lack of direction and prioritization, I would say.
Yeah, so it's that kind of organic but necessary, but maybe untamed or unplanned kind of expansion, a little bit unruly there. So what do you
Yeah,
think?
and there is a
Yeah,
place for that. I like there are different types of strategy, right? And sometimes there's a place for um something beyond the plan strategy,
yeah,
but it has to be tied to larger goals or objectives that are
right,
clear. Everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction. And effort always needs to be going into moving that way.
right, right. Otherwise, what's the point? So from your experience, when you've encountered kind of executives and leaders in this situation and organizations that are in this, yeah, feeling of stuckness. What do you think is it that triggers their kind of illumination or moment of realization that they're stuck? What is it that all of a sudden will trigger them to kind of have that aha moment, like, uh-oh, I'm stuck now. What do we do? What does that sound like? What does that look like?
Well, kind of building on my answer to the last question, like they may very well hear the words, I'm so busy,
Yeah.
right? But there isn't a lot of discussion around what's being accomplished. Right? So that busyness without productivity,
Yeah.
right? Efficient, but maybe at the wrong thing. Often it's not like that. The leaders had a gut sense of spinning wheels for a while, and the catalyst is usually something like hearing doubts from frontline staff or funders or clients, right?
Yeah.
That's usually the catalyst for a bit of navel gazing and the recognition, or the starting recognition, and then a little contemplation, a glass of white wine and a bubble bath or a night's sleep on it, and coming to the realization something's up.
Yeah. That kind of planting the seed, right? Where you're like, you have that moment of, again, realizing there's something off. And it's usually just that feeling, that initial kind of gut feeling. And then that grows, right? And that
Someone needs to name it,
uncertainty.
right? The
Yeah.
minute someone names it, you begin, like most good leaders, successful leaders are very self-aware people. So
Yeah.
it really just takes maybe bordering on insecure sometimes, but it just takes that um outward stimulus, right? That word, that experience, that's something that you can say that's a symptom of what's wrong and begin processing what it is that's the underlying cause of that symptom.
Yeah. And I think that's really wonderful that you mentioned how that's such an important kind of function of the leadership role as well. So I think that's, something that we see often in, as you said, what separates kind of great and effective leaders from ones who are less so is that kind of sense of self-awareness, and willingness as well to kind of, take a look at your own organization, your own role, your own contributions, and kind of see what's really going on underneath the surface. Um, do you have any examples, Chris, that you can share with us of, these kind of these kind of situations where, a client or a leader kind of came to you with this feeling of stuckness, and then, the uncertainty of how they weren't perhaps sure of what was contributing to that, or the reason for it, and how you might have helped them go through the process of identifying the real issues and the root causes behind that.
We had a nonprofit client that we were working with that needed to. They came to us saying we need a new strategy.
Mm,
Right? There's this and this and that. I'm trying to stay a little anonymous here, but what they described to us were a few symptoms
mm,
of kind of an unmoored strategy.
mm,
And the leader was self-aware enough to know that the issue was a strategic issue and came to us saying, we need a new strategy.
yeah,
Um, and in this case, they didn't, right? So if someone's here attending this call today, because they're like, I want the insight to just completely reset my strategy.
yeah,
This isn't about resetting strategy, it's about a strategic reset, right? Strategies are things
mm,
that change very slowly, if at
mm,
all, right? Tactics are things that are constantly responding to changes in the environment, the changes in demand, et cetera, right? The strategy for a store was always, to increase purchase. The store would always
right,
be in store promotion.
right.
But that used to be on a chalkboard. Now, then it was on digital screens. In 5 years, it's maybe an augmented reality,
Yeah.
right? The strategy is the same. The tactics needed to change. So
Hmm.
usually,
Mm,
the symptoms are sometimes not about an issue with the strategy, though they can be. Sometimes the symptoms are an issue with the implementation of the strategy.
okay.
So in this case, the client's issues were more around unclear roles,
Mm,
uh, when combined with how conflict was being dealt with. That meant people walked on eggshells. It was like avoiding conflict style. So
yeah,
without any creative conflict, nobody wants to approach those areas of uncertainty, whether that's overlap or gap, and then misaligned priorities, right? Without that North Star that everybody was working towards, there was zero motivation to engage in that conflict or to try to solve that problem. So, uh, in answer to the second part of your question, what is the solution? Most of our engagements, like a consultant, built into that is the idea of consultation, right? A
yeah,
consultative approach. Most of our consultations start with some sort of strategic roadmap.
right.
Mhm. A little different for what I want to share today, because these aren't people developing a roadmap. The roadmap that I want to share today is more about how do you reorient on your strategy. But so we'll kind of map out what are the larger goals, what are the smaller goals that are required to get there. What do you need to do to achieve those, and look for like motherhood and orphan issues, look for gaps,
Yeah,
see how the big picture fits together. But it requires the leaders to be able to say, this is what we're working towards. This is how, why, and this is how, and then validating that with a cross section of their stakeholders. You might have the most brilliant idea if none of your staff recognize that
right.
idea. If nobody, if your clients aren't interested in it at all, or your donors don't want to give to it, then it really doesn't matter how great an idea is. You need that 360 not just buy-in, but also perspective. You might have blind spots in what you're planning. And so that consultation is really important to the start of any sort of strategic work. And it's what I think is for business people, nonprofits, social enterprises out there that might be feeling a little bit stuck. I think that's the necessary first step
Yeah.
is go out and engage with your stakeholders.
That's really like I think that's a really unique approach as well because so often we, especially in business and the kind of like MBA philosophies, everything is very structured and oriented. We tend to be trained in a very focused kind of narrow perspective, as you said, in consulting in particular, to kind of look at everything from a more traditional perspective of business strategy or corporate strategy. And we're kind of given all of these um, traditional kind of areas of evaluation to look at. And those are still valid, of course. Finance, operations, the technology, all the different kind of risk profiles, and all of these main components that we tend to look at when we look at the operational kind of effectiveness of an organization. And it's really interesting to hear from you just that reminder that, yes, you can have a really powerful and effective strategy, but if it's not adopted, if it's not respected, if it's not followed, if it's not aligned, it loses value. And to your earlier point as well, that, what's the expression? I always confuse my idioms, but the execution needs strategy for breakfast or whatever it is. No, but you can have a really great strategy again, but if it's not implemented, then it's meaningless. Similarly, you can be very efficient without being effective. So all these kind of adages that we've come to hear often, it's nice to, talk about how they can really be applied to true real world situations. So,
Well,
no,
and one of the reasons we do that is because part of the work that we do with our clients on almost any project, like I said, all our projects almost always start with stakeholder engagement. They almost always end with measurement.
right.
Whether we're doing a rebrand or a new strategy or an organizational reorganization, there are ways to measure all of that. And at Grow, we want to make sure that what we're doing, as you spoke to, is not just developing a binder that's going to sit on a shelf and never be looked at.
Yeah,
Not only do we map out like multi-phased process, like approaches to our projects that produce like tangible, useful pieces at every step of the way, they spin off a bunch of other tangible things that leaders can use right away as we're doing that, right? So when we talk about, the people and we talk about like efficiency and effectiveness, we're defining measurements for both of those things. And then we're building the ideal form of the organization to deliver against that. Often we're measuring what is the gap
yeah,
between that ideal form, like a gap analysis, your future
yeah,
state, your current state, and then we'll spin if even if it's not in scope, we'll kind of spin out a plan of here are your next steps of what you need to do to finish filling that gap. And often clients come back and want help with that too, right? So,
yeah.
it's useful all around.
Well, you can't do, right? You can't do it all at once, but at least knowing what the different opportunities are, right? Where are the gaps? And then from there, as you said, you can kind of prioritize them and decide what you're going to tackle first. What's the most important for the organization? But it kind of starts with awareness, right? And identification of those issues.
I will say, like, the fact that you said, it's not very common. Um, I don't think it is. You did say that earlier. The people side and the stakeholders
Yeah,
is really in like the nonprofit sector is front and center. That's what they do.
yeah,
Right? There's not always measurement attached to it.
right.
There's seldom a dashboard. People might be evaluated based on just they're still here or seniority or kind of how they get along with the team and that sort of thing, right? And then in the for-profit world, You have kind of the opposite, right? A drive towards business metrics
Yeah,
and, on and off considerations of the people factors. And that's not, none of this is universal. But I think one of the unique things in our approach is that our whole team is not just what's the cross-functional
yeah.
or portfolio experts or whatever the terms people are using now are in terms of skill set, but we've all worked back and forth
Yeah,
between the different sectors, not just industries.
yeah,
So, I spent 10, 20 years as a director of development or fundraising manager and that sort of thing. I ran a nonprofit for a while. But I've worked in Toronto startups as a head of marketing. I've worked in like fundraising, much like when I was working, in agencies in the private sector,
yeah.
is all very performance driven. So
Yes.
I've always been, before I was a strategist, I was a marketing strategist. Before that, I was a marketer, but a performance marketer, right?
Hmm.
Um, Ford, I think it was, that said, I know half my, or a CEO of Ford, I know half my marketing budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. You never asked someone, like we call it performance marketing now or lead gen. It was
Yeah.
direct response before that. It was direct marketing before that. Digital marketing has taken all of the practices and retermed it. I look at my partner, Misha, who's being like a brand manager, a product manager, and a channel manager, right? Everywhere from Canadian Tire to Microsoft, et cetera. But also repeatedly in those roles ended up taking on philanthropy, right?
Wow.
And even our
Yeah.
partner, Alana, has worked in investment readiness, but also international development. So I think um, maybe like a secret second topic of today's conversation is that diversity in your team and that diversity in perspectives
Hmm.
generates significant value when you're doing work like this. And so
Absolutely.
again, maybe that
Yeah.
underlines why you want to do these stakeholder consultations. You want that richness of perspectives. Even if you see 180% of what's going on. You can fill in the rest. You can get to as close to 360-degree perspective
Yeah.
by talking to people in different roles, different perspectives.
That's a great idea. And I think that versatility and diversity of experience, of course, is invaluable. And you're right, it's kind of a good reminder because we tend to forget in our own companies and our own organizations that, as much as we all, as you said, as individuals, everybody, usually most people have kind of amassed a fairly rich set of experience in their own professional careers. We tend to forget, right? The years go by and you kind of, oh my goodness, I forgot that, 2 years here and 5 years there. And oh yeah, I worked for this and these people. And I find at least it kind of, goes so quickly, but there's really invaluable experience and from those histories. And as much as we should benefit from our own personal and professional experience, you're right, the kind of taking stock of and cataloging that from within our own teams and our own organizations would also be kind of a gold mine, right? When we think about the strategy and the direction of the companies and making sure that we take advantage of kind of that as being an untapped kind of resource.
No,
Uh,
I'm not a genius for suggesting it. I think if you look at everybody from Michael Porter to any great
yeah.
thinker about business or motivation or organizational behavior, anything like that, there's probably 100 frameworks out there and theories that tell you to do it, but how many people take the time and practice?
Well, I think that's the important part. And I think that's what, we really wanted to talk about today is, yeah, taking it from theory to practice. Like the theories are great, as you said, right? I'm convinced there really are no original thoughts left on the planet. There are no new movies, there are no new books. Like everything's been thought of and written, which is good, I suppose, but it's all about the implementation, right? So, what do you think, from what you've seen, like what are in the real world, right, in this kind of practical situation, what are the situations that are leading people to this stuckness and stagnation? Um, like what's causing this? What are the kind of roots behind that?
I think you got to look inside and you got to look outside.
Hmm.
Inside, so individual, right? You have to look at the organization. Some organizations are really driven top down. Some are driven
Yeah.
bottom up. That's going to potentially speak to the source of dysfunction, right? Every approach to how humans get together has its plus and its minus.
Hmm.
I look at like the boards I've sat on, and the more consensus-based boards have great cohesion, but slow decision
Yeah.
making,
Yeah.
right? So if even if you're not leader driven, even if you're bottom up, still a leader should be looking for their own blind spots. Are they holding
Mhm.
too tightly to old strategies
Yeah.
that are no I say strategies, but perhaps we mean tactics. It really depends on your level, right? If you're a CEO, marketing is a tactic. If you're a CMO, marketing is a strategy. Digital marketing is a tactic. If
Hmm.
you're an SEO writer, right? Like, so it really depends on where your view is. But if you're holding too tightly to old strategies or tactics that aren't necessarily appropriate, so
Hmm.
how do you know? So like I said, you look inside, you look outside, you look external. Has funding changed? Has the market shifted? Right? If that's happened and you're still operating as usual, that might be wishful thinking. Mm. And then internally, uh, is everything documented, right? Do you have overgrown processes? Do processes overlap? Is there a lack of accountability? And now these are not mutually exclusive, right? Accountability is about objective setting, goals, etc. So do we know who owns things? And do
Right.
we know like ownership? Again, accountability and responsibility ideally have some overlap, but are two separate things that need to be accounted for.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I mean, of course, like larger organizations and enterprises have their share of problems and dysfunction too, arguably more so. Whether that's in terms of tactical execution or strategic implementation. But it does seem like it's a special challenge or an additional challenge when we talk about, some of the smaller nonprofits, mission-driven
I would say small and
startups.
medium-sized enterprises in general,
Yeah,
right? Whether purpose-driven or not, I think it's a challenge
yeah,
because how many people are going to feel safe speaking truth to power?
right.
And that's why, good leaders are listening and maybe the strategy stuck because they got really busy and distracted and haven't been.
Yeah.
Right. And so, if they're looking for that 30-day reset, maybe this is the reminder that they need of where it starts.
Yeah. And when you are talking about those organizations, the mission-driven, kind of value-based organizations, how does that vision kind of impact the business and this sense of momentum and how it's moving or not making progress?
So are there patterns for like the purpose driven? I like purpose driven because mission driven often implies like just nonprofits, and I think
Hmm.
you can make change anywhere in the world. So I
We
like
hope
purpose
to.
driven
Yeah, I
because
like that.
I think it's a little bit more inclusive. But are there common patterns for purpose driven organizations? I think. I would say small businesses, whether it's small number, just small and medium-sized organizations in general, startups, I think that they do stall in similar ways.
Hmm.
Uh, there's stretched resources.
Hmm.
There's so much to do so quickly with only so much. So those stretched resources, competing initiatives,
Yeah.
and that often drives people to get reactive and get
Yeah.
stuck in putting out fires all the time and take their eye off the road or their hand off the wheel, driving strategy towards the larger objectives.
Yeah. And so I guess, how does that orientation affect, how these organizations can move forward? Um, and if they're going to make progress or they're going to stall in their kind of strategic direction.
So the approach that we take when we're doing like a strategic roadmap as part of a starting consultation isn't just let's collect all the ideas from the front line, right? That anybody could do that,
Yeah.
then just hire your first year MBA grad. It's about like the process with which you do that. And so it is about understanding what those larger objectives are and
Okay.
what outcomes need to be achieved to
Yeah.
effectively achieve them, right? And then looking at the activities and the efficiency of them. But I will say, if the values are shared and in practice,
Yeah.
they can often be that filter that's needed for for those decisions. So when everything isn't mapped out or there is a little ambiguity, people still know, maybe I'm used to asking Alexandra all the time, what do I do next? Or what do I need to be working on? In her absence, if I have to make a choice, which one's better for the organization,
Hmm.
its stakeholders, the purpose that or goals that we're driving towards. If values are ignored,
Mm.
then what you see is that energy, and this is not just nonprofit or purpose driven,
Yeah.
right? There are shared values in every business and
Absolutely.
every industry. And if those values are ignored and people are just busy, you see that motivation, that drive dissipate. People still might be quite productive. They still might be doing 10% above goal, but maybe they could be doing 100 if they put in that extra 10 minutes,
Yeah.
right? If they took an extra second on that email, if they cared just a little bit more. Because people need to understand why the work that they do matters and how it
Yeah.
fits into the larger picture.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that in more detail. I was very excited, when you started when we first started talking about this whole like first 30 days. And because it can be very overwhelming, right? As an executive, as an owner, we all, I think everybody has best of intentions for building a really strong organization, but it can feel, yeah, completely overwhelming all the time. Where do I start? So I love that you kind of brought this solution of just, not to call it baby steps, but having something that's very accomplishable, that seems realistic, a 30 days plan, a first 30 days approach. So can we talk a bit about that and like what happens in this 30 days? How do I dive in? How do we start making change to go from stuck to scale?
So I did you say that I brought here, but one of the reasons I'm grateful to be doing this podcast with you is it got me to actually put it together.
Right.
So
Okay.
these are things that I do business coaching as well. So some clients just need someone as a sounding board, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's just a matter of having an ad hoc board of directors or executive
Yeah.
team. A personal board is what they used to call it 20 years ago and such. So, I often coach people through like, well, let's get you started,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And this first 30 days playbook that we spoke about was really just taking the best practices that are tried and true and have worked for our clients across sectors and industries, and taking some of that needed direction from the business coaching
Yeah.
and saying, okay, what is like kind of a universal approach that will work for 80% of the people 80% of
Right.
the time, right? And so I would say and you spoke earlier about theory, and it's about implementation. I We came in second for a probably what would have been the largest contract for our organization a year or two ago, and that when we asked for feedback, we were told the reason was that we seemed a little too academic in our approach.
Okay.
That same organization has come back to us this year for
Okay.
exactly that same sort of work.
Hmm.
I think it's important to understand the theory, right? To have a framework, to have a lens to look through things at. Um, but like just like efficiency and effectiveness, you're not really going to achieve your objectives if you focus on one. Same with like theory and implementation, right?
Right.
The theory provides the lens through which to look at what you're doing and a structure to the work that you do so that your work can be efficient, so that you have a way of communicating it and involving others.
Yeah.
And so I'd say the first 30-day playbook is about mixing, a little bit of theory with, I don't know, some practical knowledge and such, right? And I've talked to a couple of clients and been like, well, what do you think about this? And like it resonates with them, and they say, it kind of reflects in some way the approach that we took in launching their, if I may say so, successful initiatives.
Yeah.
So I'd say, and I'll say it again, it starts with, in that first week, it starts with what are your outcomes? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Right? And it isn't sales. When
Mm.
there was a time where I was leading workshops like this for over 100 new programs for the United Church of Canada. And, if I asked, well, what is the problem that you're solving? You'd have some people say butts and seats and revenue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, really, because that is a byproduct of the problem.
Yeah.
The problem in that case would have been connection or relevance to the community or
Yeah.
something like that. Right? So even if you're a for-profit business,
Hmm.
right, um, your shareholders may say, if you're a public company, may say, well, you exist to create shareholder value, and that's
Yeah.
the lens they're looking at it. But to your clients, you're solving a problem,
Yeah.
right? Um, if you're selling me a cough drop, right, you're solving the coughing problem. Your competition isn't cough drops, it's cough drops, cough syrup, Ayurvedic medicine, orange juice, right? All the other things that I might do to solve that problem. So, when we talk about what are the outcomes in mind, they need to be a little bit more wider in that respect,
Mm.
right? They do have to filter down to um, productive business objectives, metrics, that sort of thing, outcomes and outputs definitely need to be measured, but you have to start with those outcomes. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And, as we've kind of talked about already, with that in mind, you can then go have conversations with your stakeholders. Um, Not randomly, the most effective thing is to map stakeholders to
Hmm.
see that you get a cross section of not just types, but maybe depending on what's relevant for your organization, ages, right?
Yeah.
Gender expression, whatever. It's really going to depend on the nature of your organization and who you are, but as much diversity in both role and type, et cetera, as you can, right? And then you got to listen, right? Listen to your staff, listen to your clients. Um, for those looking for like that 30-day fix,
Yeah.
just talking to them about what the objectives are will surface pain points and bright spots, things
Mm.
that you should probably be doing more of and duplicate, and
Mm.
things that aren't working for the organization. Right? What you really want to get out of that first week of stakeholder engagement is just, if you're trying for a 30-day turnaround, is
Yeah.
just clarity on what's dragging you down.
Yeah.
Why are you stuck? Right? The next period would be like your second week of doing this, having gathered all of that. Again, I would say we want to ground it in theory, right? The project management body of knowledge, the PMP and the agreed to best practices of managing programs and projects, etc., would say before you go and do anything. So with a task like this, clarify the scope, prioritize what you need to do, and that allows you to cut out any distractions from what you're trying to achieve. So if you need to pivot and you're trying to do that in a month, you can't do everything all at once
Right.
so you have to kind of say, okay, well, where are the biggest pain points? What is the hugest success? And then you want to look at your strategy. So there's four types of strategy. This is where like the MBA talk comes out.
Okay.
There's your planned strategy, right? Or your realized strategy. So you planned your strategy within your planned strategy. You realize some of that,
Hmm.
and some of that you don't realize. We call it like your unrealized strategy, right? There's also your emergent strategy. So, agile organizations will see something happen and start adapting to it or pursuing it, right? It may be that as an organization or a leader, you're so focused on the planned strategy and
Mm.
haven't seen the internal or external changes that have happened that you're not recognizing the opportunity for an emergent strategy.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what you're trying to surface, I would say, in week two is looking at what perhaps is required in terms of change. What is the scope that you have the capacity to reasonably achieve? And what should the priorities be within that scope? And what you're really looking to do in week two is what is like just a plan for a quick reset,
Right.
right? Like just get down, what are you going to do? And then you spend the next 2 weeks doing it, right? You pick 1 to 2 really visible priorities that will show impact and momentum. So that this is why you want to like surface those quick wins,
Yeah.
show everybody that you listened and that you're changing and that you're changing quickly. But I say 1 or 2 because everything again all at once changing, you may just create new problems. So what you want to do is kind of work through them a few at a time, but do ones that start with ones that will produce visible value.
Right. It's
Right?
not just for show, right? These are the ones that have, as you said, you've kind of prioritized as well and recognize that there is an immediate value and impact that they can have.
Yeah, and then so you're looking for kind of a sense of progress that builds trust. And even here, there's theory that can be applied. ProSci is the change management theory, and they have the
Mhm.
ADKAR model. But at the end of the day, it's look at that quick plan you put together, look for the quick wins, the visible, impactful change that will show momentum and give people a sense of progress because sometimes part of the reason you're stuck is that loss of trust between um like within the organization. So this is a way to show cross stakeholder collaboration, agility and openness to change, etc.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, it sounds easy, but I'm sure it's not, right? 30 days, you know, when you list these three steps, I think it's great to have the clarity there in the kind of simplicity, but no doubt it's not actually quite so simple to implement. But I like that you've kind of shared with us the framework for how to do that, because that's where it does get a little overwhelming. Um,
And we're going to have that available to people that
yeah,
that attend the webinar. So and we've put together something I think that goes into a lot more detail and gives people the framework to do this themselves. But it's very achievable to
yeah,
spend a week talking and listening to people, a week sketching out a plan, a week getting a few quick wins, and another week, kind of
another one. Yeah.
extending the effort further, right?
Yeah. And, just curious, with even though you haven't had this particular approach documented and structured this way in the past, no doubt, as you said, this is an approach you have used with clients and organizations before. Um, so can you share with us, just because I'm nervous at the time, there's so much more to talk about, but can you give us kind of a little teaser of some of the examples where this approach has been taken um, and it's been effective, where there was a so-called success story in place, or there was that positive turnaround that we're hoping to achieve that was implemented.
Yeah, we had a nonprofit client that was growing fast. Revenue was up about 40%, 47% in 5 years. Uh, but there'd really been no planned effort towards staff roles and structure, so therefore kind of like lag behind a bit. So their pain point was that everybody, leadership and staff, felt pulled in too many directions,
Hmm.
that programs were overlapping, that people's energy was just spread thin and scattered. So, the 30-day reset for them involved staff focus groups to reveal that duplication and those unclear accountabilities, followed by mapping priorities using a theory of change to clarify core outcomes. And then those final 2 weeks of the 30-day reset was pausing. One underperforming program was paused. Uh, Staff were shifted in terms of capacity to a flagship initiative, and weekly check-ins within the team and between the leadership and the team were implemented. And that meant within a month, staff morale was lifted, reporting lines were clearer. There was generally from external stakeholders a notice of a sharper focus. Right? I think of another client that just going through the process of collecting and planning,
Hmm.
in this case, working on business metrics for a deal room for investment, just looking at the data and trying to parse the data just to clear up a few inconsistencies. Client told me, Chris, in the last 20 minutes, you've made me $6,000 and I expect another like 30,000 by the end of the day. And that was just in kind of like auditing the processes and looking
Wow.
at exceptions, right? Those quick wins, they earn trust, they build energy, they show people that anything's possible, and you can use that momentum to open up space for the longer term restructuring that might be necessary.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? Those are the kind of wins that we all look for. Who wouldn't want wouldn't want to fast track that? And as you said, 30 days is well, it's a lot of time and not a lot of time, but to be able to implement to take these three steps and then see that kind of positive result in that period of time would be great. Let's just talk on the quickly on the flip side. Um, are there cases that you've seen where, an organization or a leader just didn't take action for any particular reason, and or they did, they took the wrong action, and then, what was the outcome or the result there? That would be the
My
the
my job
opposite,
is to make sure that doesn't happen, but I
right?
can give
Yes.
you two scenarios in which it often does,
Yeah.
um, and how to avoid them, right? So, the challenge we see with our clients is they love the road mapping, the consultations, the research, and the capacity building. But then they want to skip all the other stuff to the fun stuff, the
Yeah.
implementation without the planning. So we do all the gathering and structuring and all that, but they want to avoid like the planning part of strategy. Um, we don't let them. By that point, we've usually built up a lot of social credit with them, and we'll spend all of it if we need to tell the client that they're making a mistake, and it can be painful. But so far, those crucial conversations, we've been successful.
Hmm.
The two cases I would say, uh, avoiding the reset.
Okay.
Mhm. So, leadership sensing that morale is slipping, the programs are underperforming, and instead of engaging staff early, they delay action,
Hmm.
hoping that the next funding cycle is going to solve things. Staff are going to grow more frustrated, right? Turnover is going to happen. By the time you do actually engage stakeholders, you've drained too much energy out of them and you've lost their trust, and it's a lot more work to rebuild.
Yeah.
So, like to avoid that, you got to recognize that waiting makes the reset more costly.
Right.
So, momentum and trust, they're easier to protect than they are to rebuild.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then the other case I would give you, so that would be that previous example would be, avoiding it.
Yeah.
The other mistake can be doing the wrong thing, which is, the analysis paralysis. It might be part of the reason why something's being delayed, right? You want to avoid that wrong action. So I think of like, a business, and again, I'm not giving specifics of a particular client, but uh, agency hits revenue plateau. Uh, Leaders know that strategy is stuck,
Hmm.
but choose a cosmetic fix, rebranding and marketing spend. This is one I can relate to because I'd say a third of clients that come to us thinking that that's what they need, and when we talk to them and ask them about their problems and do that consultation, they recognize there's like four steps before that, right? But and so we've fortunately avoided this with all of our clients so far. But and I don't think we would jump right into like a rebrand without understanding the values and the underpinnings of an organization. But in this case, we've all seen organizations and leadership. Cracker Barrel's been in the news for this. Your business
Oh
model
yeah.
is just crashing and burning, but maybe a new picture on the outside of the building will help, right? So you'll spend all this time and money. The most costly part of the whole process is the rebrand. It isn't the
Yeah.
conversations and such. So new website, new materials roll out, but internal processes, scope creep, unclear priorities,
Yeah.
they're still there,
Yeah.
just with a fresh coat of paint. If you have black mold, you don't just put new paint on black mold in your house, right? So staff are still going to feel burnt out. Clients will still see missed deadlines. It doesn't matter what you're promising with your new brand because it's all hollow, right? The core issues remain
We haven't
untouched.
addressed the root issues, right?
Yeah. So you always want to make sure that you have something new. If you're planning on changing your brand, you're changing your promise. So what is it that's changed that you're promising that people want, right? So a
Mm.
reset isn't about appearances. It's about operational fixes. It's about stakeholder engagement. A rebrand will magnify what's happening in your organization. So if you're
Mm.
making positive change, great. It will bring attention to that positive change.
Mm.
But if you're not, maybe you don't want that attention.
It's a good point. So let's talk, Kristen, then just to kind of get down and dirty with the practical tips for everyone here. What can the leaders on the line here do today on their own without us, without consulting, without hiring anyone, without that outside help? What can they do to get unstuck starting today?
Wow, I'd much rather they hire someone. But if they don't if they don't want to talk to us, what can they do is stop doing. Just for a minute. Stop doing what you're doing. If it's not working and doing, what is it? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and
Yep.
over again and expect a different
Expecting a
result. So
different result. There we go. Yeah.
what can they do? Don't do. Spend a day at least just listening to staff and clients,
Okay.
right? Look if you can cut one low priority initiative to free up a bit of capacity to start investing in this in a meaningful way, right? So, like I said, this isn't about taking up 4 weeks, 22 working days, eight or maybe 12 hours a day, towards that 200. It's not about 200 hours of effort. This can be something that if you can free up even 10 or 20% of your time, you can do, right? So can you cut a low priority initiative and free up some capacity to fix some of the larger problems with your strategy or your organization? And you know, transparency is a two-way street, right? You're not going to get much out of your staff and clients, um, if they don't trust you. And if
Mm.
you want to build or maintain that trust, you need to be open with your team. Talk to them about what you're hearing. Oh, that's a problem for you, Alexandra. I heard the same thing from this division client, etc. That's it sounds like this is something that should be a priority for attention. So then when you solve that problem in 2 weeks, you've built that trust. I've experienced that. I remember going into one really, really dysfunctional team with a really bad organizational culture.
Okay.
And I mean, when I've gone in as a leader, you never just go in and start making changes. So, you kind of
Hope not.
That service model of leadership to begin with, and then seeing something that was taking like 10, 15 hours of one of the managers that reported to me every week or two. And they said, you can't do it that way. Just try it this way. Just based on my experience, having been like even now as a leader, I think I'll never lose that middle management mentality of trying to like find that middle ground and involve everybody and try to make
Hmm.
everybody happy, right? Wouldn't do it, wouldn't do it. I said, okay, well, if I can find a way to free up some of your time, or I think I said, okay, this week after helping him with one or two things, I said, okay, but now you gotta try this thing for me. But or I say if it doesn't work, I'll never try to tell you about how you do your work again. If it does work, whatever time you save, you have to be willing to put into additional capacity building projects and in partnership with me. And of course it worked. It took it down to like 20, 30 minutes from 10 hours,
Oh, wow.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Magic.
this became the center of where we transformed the rest of the organization
Yeah.
to the point, after 4 years, because I've always worked change management jobs. I get bored. I fix the thing, then it operates on its own. It doesn't need me. I wander off and do something else. This is the person that was then kind of trained to replace me. But we were a organization on two floors, and I ran, most of the organization on the operational floor. And we actually took something that was very much a top-down dysfunctional organization and rebuilt the culture from the bottom up. We could only change our floor and our team at first, but eventually that started to
Yeah. It
impact
started
other
spreading.
areas of the organization that were toxic
Yeah.
because they wanted what we had. They wanted to work collaboratively. They wanted trust. They'd been burned too many times, but we got there.
Wow. Well, that's a great story. We just talked about kind of what people can do themselves directly, and jokingly saying, of course, I would also like it if everyone hired an expert. When is it the right time, Chris, to prioritize bringing in that outside help? And yeah, when is it not right to go it alone? When's the right time to get assistance?
So we started Grow Well because we wanted to democratize access to expertise, right? We didn't want it to just be the big multinationals that had an expert and the little guy was left by himself trying to figure things out. We wanted to be able to bring this portfolio of like I'm happy to be the least smart person in the room most of the time,
Yeah.
but I want to give people access to those people that I get to be in the room with. So like there are multiple aspects of our business model that facilitate that. When do you need to bring in outside expertise? When the issue spans across the organization, right? Multiple roles, different systems, when it's a governance issue, right? Often for credibility purposes, perhaps you need to bring in someone neutral, or there's a lack of trust, so you need somebody that can surface those hard truths. Often, when we do stakeholder engagement, something will come up from stakeholders that they're willing to tell us that they wouldn't tell the client directly, right? And having those conversations always starts with, well, that's not true, right? So it takes a little bit of trust building for us to be able to show them that. So if you suspect or you try this and you're not really getting any traction, everybody's saying, well, it's fine, then maybe you need to bring in like a unbiased third party. And sometimes like funders might require
Mhm.
a third party to do it, or regulators or
Yeah.
such. If you have funders or regulators, even if it's not a requirement, it could generally look pretty good if you're bringing in outside help, at least for, some form of audit of processes, procedures, aspects that have, been controversial or have received a lot of complaints.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's something we see often on the consulting side, right? Is it would be great if everyone we were all just inspired to get assistance, but of course, it's very often, as you said, the funders and regulators and those who have those kind of standards and expectations. So, I'm appreciative to them. It obviously leads to some important work getting done that otherwise might not. Yeah. Um, Chris, again, just kind of closing the loop on this practical aspect here. If you had to pick your top tips, your, top three tips to share with everyone today, what would they be for those listening and joining us to kind of leave with those ready to go actions?
It's a tough one. Say, I think there's been one common thread to a lot of what we've spoken about today. I think start with people, not plans. Don't go into it with the
Hmm.
plan at the very beginning.
Yep.
Gather your information first. That way you're not going in the biased perspective or trying to fit people's input into a box.
Mm.
Um, then plan, but don't stick to the plan, right? Sequence your efforts. Don't try to do everything at once. And then communication. Communicate early, communicate often. Even when answers aren't complete, even when you don't know, like you look at Crisis Management 101 tells you that, right? Be the one to control the story, even when it's not a positive story, as if you
Yeah.
don't, someone else is going to fill that vacuum.
Yep.
So make sure that you're as open and transparent as you're asking others to be with you.
That's nice, and I'm sure that's appreciated as well. That we talked a lot today about kind of trust building and relationship building and how essential that is to the long-term kind of success
Mhm.
of this strategic reset. So
There's no reset without
valuable,
trust. Okay?
right? Yeah. So then, just once this reset has taken place, once a company or an organization has been successful in doing that, how do we make sure that we don't fall back into old habits? How do we avoid, falling back into stagnation 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now?
Uh, Check-ins. uh, Build in quarterly, strategy reset checkpoints or milestones or such, or kind of like mini resets on a quarterly basis that would be smaller than this effort. It might be,
Mm.
every quarter you spend 3 days. You spread it out maybe,
Yeah.
right? And you do it in your one-on-ones. There's like everybody will know what approach works best for them and their team, but do it. Have strategy be part of a structured approach to communication. And then keep listening. You created some listening loops, right? Where people are opening up to you and you're coming back to them. If you have that trust, some leaders are listening right now and rolling their eyes at how obvious this all is.
Yep.
But maybe they're not on this call. Maybe they don't see a need for a strategic reset. If you're doing that naturally, you're not going to have you're less likely to get stuck in the mud, right? And if you do all the work to get out of the mud, keep that momentum, keep listening, keep having more detailed check-ins specifically about strategy, but look for ways, watch for those emergent strategies and tactics, be willing to adapt, like still plan. Just don't be beholden to the plan and let, everybody else leave you behind.
Right. And sometimes, simple is okay and obvious is okay, right? I think oftentimes something that we see, right, is that, solutions that seem quite obvious in hindsight aren't so in the beginning, right? So that's a good sign that you can celebrate if you're listening to this, as you said, for anybody who's sitting there kind of, and I definitely would be the first person to do that, rolling my eyes, being like, oh, well, don't we all know this? Isn't this, MBA 101? It is, but right? Implementing it,
Are
doing
they
it, living
doing it?
it is very different,
And
right?
if you are doing it, I give you permission to quickly run for a snack for 2 minutes.
Yeah. And why, I guess just, quickly, Chris, let's talk about what to that point. Strategy doesn't need to be this massive, esoteric, overwhelming kind of elitist work. It is actually important. Eye rolls aside, it really can be so important to an organization of any size, right? As you said, in any sector, in any industry, and really important to the ongoing growth and sustainability of an organization. So, how is that for you? Like, how important is this strategic reset and constant kind of awareness and having a critical approach to strategic work. How important is that to business sustainability and success?
There's plenty of businesses that are doing amazing, just constantly picking the right tactics,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
That's not great. That's not ideal, but that can give you that that can put your kids through college. So but strategy can give you like that tenfold performance, right? Getting every one of your decisions in alignment around a North Star will mean that one thing isn't holding you back. So strategy is valuable in that respect, but strategy is never done. The likely reason that someone's here for a strategic reset is their strategy is 5 or 10 years old, or depending on the industry, maybe 3 months old and out of date, right? It's important that people recognize that it isn't I sit down, I look at the snapshot of what's happening right now, I make a plan and I carry forward that plan. Mm. One of the hardest things that with the leaders that I've worked with, and even with the students when I'm teaching this, is to understand that as much as we learn about strategy and speak about strategy as if it's static,
Yep.
it isn't, it's fluid. As you're developing a strategy, so are all your competitors, and
Hmm.
consumer behavior is changing, and your funders' priorities are changing. So, understanding that you're constantly going to have to shift the direction of the boat to make sure you're still moving towards your North Star. That North Star doesn't move, but everything around it does, including your competitors. So if you're not doing those quarterly check-ins, if you're not constantly adjusting your strategy, it's going to require another reset. But the point is, strategy will constantly, and even worse strategy, static, and you're building out a strategy to an industry that for some reason isn't really changing, it still needs to be iterative, because as you
Yeah.
go through it the second time, you can tighten up and tighten up and tighten up that alignment and squeeze more and more efficiency and effectiveness out. But there's only so many hours in a day. People
That's
should
right.
have work-life balance or work-life integration. If you're running a small or medium-sized organization, every day you're deciding which 75% of the things you need to do, not to do. I see you nodding your head because you and I have had this discussion.
Many
We're
times.
not for we do this, but we also have the same challenges that every other business owner has, right? So there needs to be a balance between how much effort you put into this and actually running the business. There also needs to be that same balance between what is my deliberate planning and
Yeah.
where am I leaving space for emergent adaptation.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into the questions from everyone. I'm going to ask you one final question and then we'll open it up. Chris, we talked top threes, we talked tips. If you had to leave only one, leave just one takeaway for everyone joining us today about how to reset their strategy, what would that be?
Oh, didn't I just pick three and now I gotta nail it? I gotta narrow it down to one. Um, can I pick two? I'll give you two. Um, having I think mission and value are important. Mission and values, factoring into that North Star. We had a business come to us that was a numbers business and just wanted to grow from 1 to 5 locations. And we showed that client how their values wasn't something that they needed to do on the side, that actually integrating their values, it ended up providing them differentiating factor that's positively impacted all areas of their business, but has actually resulted in the funding conversations that they wanted to have.
Mm,
So I'd say your values should be part of it, whatever kind of organization you are.
yeah.
But if I was to say one, um, resetting isn't about grand gestures, right? Start small, listen, sequence, build momentum. big changes will start with those little things that you do in the first 30 days.
Great. All right, well, we're going to take a little pause here and invite everyone to submit their questions, and we'll see what Chris has to say to your questions. And then at the end, we'll be back with a little more information about the gift and guide and how you can get in touch with Chris to continue the conversation. All right.